A millionaire found two freezing sisters hiding in his parking garage. The older girl whispered something that stopped his heart. "Take her instead of me." He didn't know they were running from a man who believed fear was power, and that saving them would start a fight that could destroy everything. Chicago in winter did not simply feel cold. It felt deliberate. The wind moved sideways through the open levels of the underground parking structure, scraping across concrete pillars and polished black cars like a restless ghost. Snow drifted through the ramp entrance and gathered in thin white lines along the edges of the floor. Cade Ellington stepped out of the elevator with the calm posture of a man who had spent 20 years mastering pressure. 38, billionaire investor, freshly divorced. His charcoal coat was perfectly cut, his shoes untouched by the slush outside. On paper, his life was flawless. Inside, it was empty. He pressed the unlock button on his key fob and started walking toward his car when he heard it. A sound too small for a place built for engines. A quiet sob. Cade stopped. The noise came again, soft, uneven, the kind of cry someone makes when they are trying very hard not to cry. He followed it past a row of silent SUVs until he reached the far corner of the garage. Two tiny figures sat pressed against a concrete pillar. A thin girl, no older than 8, curled forward like a shield, wrapping her body around a much smaller child in her arms. Snow clung to the older girl's tangled brown hair. Her coat was too light for this kind of night. The little one, maybe 4, was shaking violently. Cade took one careful step closer. The older girl lifted her head. Her eyes were bright, watchful, far older than her face. She studied him for a moment. Then she whispered something that made Cade's heart stop. "Can you take her instead of me?" She gently pushed the smaller girl forward and held out a cheap little bracelet, like she was offering payment. For a moment, Cade Ellington did not move, not because he didn't understand the girl's words, because he understood them too clearly. The smaller child, Lila, though he didn't know her name yet, clung weakly to the older girl's coat, trembling from the cold. Her tiny shoes were soaked through with slush. The older girl held the bracelet out again. It was plastic. Cheap. Probably from a dollar store. Her hand was shaking, but her voice tried to stay steady. "You can say you bought her," she whispered. "That way he won't get mad." Cade slowly crouched down to their level. "Who?" he asked quietly. The girl didn't answer the question. Instead, she pulled the little one closer. "She's only 4, she said. "She still thinks people are kind." The words landed heavier than any accusation. Cade felt something shift inside his chest, an instinct he had buried under contracts negotiations and quarterly reports. He took off his coat and gently wrapped it around the smaller girl. "What's your name?" he asked. The older girl hesitated. Then finally, "Ivy." She glanced nervously toward the entrance ramp of the garage, like she was expecting something to appear. And her Cade asked, "Lila." Lila coughed weakly. Cade pulled out his phone. Responsible adults called emergency services in situations like this. He began dialing, then Ivy's eyes suddenly widened. Her entire body went rigid. She grabbed Cade's sleeve and whispered one word. "Don't." Cade followed her gaze across the garage. A dark SUV had just rolled slowly inside. It wasn't looking for a parking space. It was searching. Ivy leaned close to Cade and whispered a name. Damian Cross. Not like she knew him. Like she feared him. The SUV moved slowly through the parking garage. Too slowly. Its headlights were dimmed, gliding across the concrete floor, like pale blades of light. It didn't turn toward empty parking spaces. It drifted. Searching. Cade Ellington lowered his phone. The emergency call disappeared from the screen. Beside him, Ivy's grip tightened on his sleeve. Her breathing had changed, shallow, controlled the way people breathe when they're trying not to panic. "He's here," she whispered. Cade studied the approaching vehicle. Tinted windows, black paint, engine humming quietly. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal. But everything about it felt wrong. "Who is he?" Cade asked softly. Ivy didn't take her eyes off the SUV. "Family," she said. The word held no warmth, only dread. The SUV turned down the next row of vehicles, getting closer. Lila whimpered weakly inside Cade's coat. Ivy leaned close to him. "If he sees us," she whispered, "he'll take us." Cade made a decision. Fast. Quiet. "We're going to walk to my car," he said calmly. "No running." Ivy nodded immediately. She lifted Lila into her arms with surprising strength for such a small body. Cade opened the back door of his sedan without triggering the overhead lights. The girls slid inside. He shut the door gently and walked around to the driver's seat. The SUV stopped 2 lanes away, watching. Cade started the engine. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the SUV rolled forward, following. Snow spiraled down the exit ramp ahead. In the rearview mirror, Ivy's pale face appeared between the seats. "Don't stop," she whispered. "If you stop, he'll take us." Cade drove toward the exit, and the SUV followed them into the storm. Snow swept across the Chicago streets in thick spirals as Cade Ellington's sedan exited the underground garage and merged onto the quiet avenue. For a brief moment, the road ahead looked empty. Then the dark SUV rolled out behind them, still following. Cade didn't accelerate wildly. Panic made mistakes. Instead, he drove with the calm precision that had carried him through hostile business deals and collapsing markets. In the rearview mirror, the SUV's headlights stayed 2 car lengths behind. Patient, measuring. In the back seat, Lila's coughing grew worse. Ivy wrapped both arms around her little sister, rocking her gently. "She gets cold fast," Ivy whispered. "You have to warm her slow." Cade glanced at the mirror again. The SUV suddenly moved closer. Too close. Its headlights filled the rear glass like a blinding white wall. Ivy leaned forward between the seats. "Don't stop," she whispered urgently. Cade turned onto a busier downtown street, letting traffic build around them. The SUV followed through every turn. At the next intersection, it crept closer again, drifting toward the side of Cade's car, as if trying to push him toward the curb. Not a crash? A warning? Cade's jaw tightened. He slowed slightly, letting 2 taxis slide between them. For the first time, the SUV hesitated. Traffic cameras hung above the intersection. Public, visible, watched. The SUV backed off half a lane, still following, but no longer pressing. In the back seat, Ivy stared out the window with silent terror. "Is he coming?" she whispered. Cade met her eyes in the mirror. "Not tonight," he said calmly. But deep down, Cade Ellington knew something else. This wasn't pursuit. It was patience. Cade's penthouse towered above downtown Chicago like a glass lighthouse. Warm lights filled the lobby as the elevator carried them upward in complete silence. Lila shivered inside Cade's coat. Ivy held her tightly, never relaxing her grip. Even inside the elevator, Ivy stood angled toward the door, watching, listening, prepared. The doors opened into Cade's penthouse. Soft lighting glowed across polished floors and quiet walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the snow-covered city far below. The space was enormous, beautiful, and completely empty. Cade locked the door behind them. Ivy immediately scanned the apartment. Hallway, windows, kitchen, door locks, emergency exits. Cade noticed every movement. Fear had trained her well. "Come here," he said gently. He grabbed several blankets from a closet and handed them to Ivy instead of placing them himself. "You do it." Ivy nodded. She wrapped Lila slowly, carefully rubbing warmth back into the little girl's arms. Cade poured warm water into a glass. Lila sipped weakly. For the first time since the garage, the shaking began to slow. "What's your name?" Cade asked softly. "Ivy," she said. "And her Lila." Cade crouched beside them. I'm Cade. Ivy looked toward the windows again. The snow outside swirled against the glass. Does he know where we are? She asked quietly. Cade didn't answer immediately, because he didn't know. Just then, a firm knock sounded at the door. Ivy flinched violently. Lila whimpered. Cade moved to the security screen beside the door and exhaled. Detective Nia Vale stood outside. Detective Nia Vale stepped inside the penthouse with snow dusting her dark coat. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice. She simply looked. Within seconds, she understood the room. 2 frightened children, 1 exhausted billionaire, and fear hanging in the air like fog. Nia crouched beside the girls, keeping her badge turned inward so it didn't flash like authority. Hi, she said softly. Lila buried her face deeper into Ivy's shoulder. Ivy didn't move. Nia nodded slightly. You kept her warm, the detective said. A flicker of pride crossed Ivy's guarded face. Cade quickly explained what happened in the garage, the SUV, the name Damien Cross, the pursuit through the snow. Nia listened without interrupting. Her expression sharpened only once, at the name. Cross, she repeated quietly. Then she turned back toward Ivy. Where's your mom, sweetheart? Ivy hesitated. Then she whispered something unexpected. She was driving. Cade noticed a small plastic band on Lila's wrist. Hospital. Nia followed his gaze immediately. Within seconds, she stepped aside and made a call. Her voice stayed calm, precise. When she returned, the room felt different. There's a Serena Wren admitted tonight, she said. Car accident. Ivy's head snapped up. She's alive, the girl asked quickly. Nia nodded, stable but injured. The tension in Ivy's shoulders finally cracked. For the first time, she looked like an 8-year-old. But the detective wasn't finished. Here's the problem, Nia continued quietly. Damien Cross tried to access the hospital earlier tonight. Silence filled the penthouse. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, Cade felt something shift deep in his chest. This wasn't just about 2 children anymore. Someone had been hunting them. The penthouse felt warmer now, but Ivy still sat stiffly on the couch, her body angled toward the door, as if danger might walk in at any moment. Detective Nia Vale noticed everything. Fear had patterns, and Ivy carried them all. Nia spoke gently. Tell me about Damien Cross. Ivy didn't answer right away. Her fingers kept rubbing the edge of the blanket wrapped around Lila. He helps Mom sometimes, she said finally. The words sounded rehearsed. Nia didn't challenge them. Sometimes family helps, she said quietly, and sometimes they don't. Ivy's shoulders tightened. Cade watched the girl carefully. That's when he saw it. A thin red mark near Ivy's wrist. Not fresh, but not old either. May I see your hand? Cade asked softly. Ivy hesitated, then slowly turned her wrist over. The skin near her thumb was slightly burned. Small, but unmistakable. Nia's voice lowered. How did that happen? Ivy stared at the floor. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she whispered, he was holding paper. Cade felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. What kind of paper? Nia asked. Insurance papers, Ivy murmured. Her voice barely existed now. He lit the corner with a lighter and held it close to my hand. The room went completely silent. He said pain makes people listen faster. Lila stirred weakly in her sleep. Ivy wrapped her arms tighter around her sister. He said Mom just needed motivation. Cade's jaw tightened slowly. Across the city, somewhere in the snow, a man believed fear was leverage. What Damien Cross didn't know yet was that someone had just stepped between him and that leverage. Next, Part 8, 300 words. 3 minutes, Cade and Detective Vale go to the hospital to meet the girl's mother for the first time. Hospitals had their own kind of silence. Not peaceful, mechanical. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly as Cade Ellington walked beside Detective Nia Vale through the trauma wing of St. Matthew's Hospital. Rooms passed in quiet rows. Machines hummed steadily behind half-open doors. At the end of the hallway, Nia stopped. Room 314, Serena Wren. Inside, a woman in her early 30s lay propped against white pillows. Her dark hair was tied loosely back, and one arm rested in a sling. Bruises colored the skin near her collarbone. She looked smaller than the storm her daughters had run from. Serena turned her head when the door opened. Her first reaction was confusion. Her second was fear. "Where are my girls?" she asked immediately. "They're safe," Nia said calmly. Serena's shoulders dropped slightly, relief breaking through her exhaustion. With him, Nia added, nodding toward Cade. Serena studied him carefully. Cade stepped forward, keeping his voice steady. "They're warm," he said. "They ate. They're sleeping." Serena closed her eyes for a moment, then whispered, "I told them to run." The room fell quiet. "Run from who?" Nia asked gently. Serena hesitated, then said the name. "Damien," she swallowed before continuing. "He said the insurance claim would take months if I handled it myself." Cade listened carefully. "But if I signed the paperwork," Serena continued, "he could speed it up." "And when you refused?" Nia asked. Serena's hands tightened around the blanket. He stopped asking. A shadow crossed the doorway. A man stepped into the room. Perfect coat, polite smile, and calm eyes that carried no warmth. Damien Cross had arrived. Damien Cross walked into the hospital room as if he belonged there. Tall, calm, perfectly dressed despite the storm outside. He carried a bouquet of white lilies in one hand. "Serena," he said warmly, stepping forward. "I heard you were awake." The flowers touched the counter beside the bed. Serena's breathing changed instantly. Small, shallow. Fear had memory. Detective Nia Vale moved subtly between Damien and the hospital bed. "You're not authorized for visitation," she said evenly. Damien's smile never faltered. "I'm family." His voice was smooth, polished. "I've been helping Serena manage the financial situation." Cade studied him carefully. No raised voice, no threats, just quiet pressure. Damien looked past Nia toward Serena. "You've been through a lot," he said gently. "But we really should finalize the insurance documents." Serena shook her head slowly. "No." The word barely carried across the room. Damien's smile thinned just slightly. "You're overwhelmed," he said. "I understand that." Cade stepped forward. "Any paperwork discussion happens with Detective Vale present." Damien's eyes shifted toward him for the first time. "Measuring." "And you are?" Damien asked lightly. "Someone making sure no one signs under pressure." The air in the room tightened. Damien adjusted the cuff of his coat. "You think this is pressure?" he asked quietly. "No," Cade replied. "I think this is coercion." For the first time, irritation flashed across Damien's face, only for a second. Then the mask returned. He looked back at Serena. "We'll revisit this when you're thinking clearly," he said, and walked calmly out of the room. But Cade could feel it. The storm between them had only just begun. The penthouse had finally grown quiet. Outside, Chicago's winter storm softened into slow, drifting snow. The city lights shimmered through the glass walls like distant stars. Inside Cade Ellington's apartment, the warmth felt almost unnatural after the freezing garage where the night had begun. Lila slept on the couch, wrapped in layers of blankets. Her breathing had finally steadied the soft rise and fall of her chest, almost peaceful. Ivy sat on the floor beside her, still awake, still watching the door. Cade noticed that before he went to bed. Fear had trained her not to sleep deeply. Hours later, Cade woke to silence. Not normal silence, the kind that feels wrong. He sat up, instinct prickling through his chest. The hallway lamp he had left on still glowed softly, but something else had changed. The couch. Leela was still there, sleeping, but Ivy wasn't. Cade moved quickly through the apartment. Kitchen, guest room, bathroom, empty. His heart began to pound. He rushed to the security monitor near the front door. The footage rewound in cold, digital frames. 2 hours earlier. The elevator doors opened. Ivy stepped inside alone. No coat. No hesitation. Cade's stomach dropped. Minutes later, he was in the underground garage again, cold air rushing through the concrete levels. He spotted her near the far wall, standing between rows of parked cars, waiting, like she had in the first place he found her. Cade approached slowly. Ivy, she didn't turn. Her small shoulders trembled. I thought if he came, she whispered, I could go with him. The words struck Cade like a physical blow. He wouldn't take Lila, then she continued quietly. And Mom wouldn't have to sign. She finally turned toward him. Tears ran silently down her face. I was just going to wait. Cade crossed the distance between them and knelt in front of her. For the first time that night, his voice carried real emotion. No. He gently placed his hands on her shoulders. No one trades themselves anymore. Ivy stared at him, unsure whether to believe it. Cade stood and held out his hand. Come inside. After a long moment, she took it. Morning arrived slowly over Chicago. Gray winter light filled the penthouse, softening the sharp lines of Cade Ellington's perfectly designed apartment. For years, the space had been admired in architecture magazines. Clean, minimal, controlled. But that morning it looked different. Blankets were scattered across the couch. 2 mismatched mugs sat on the kitchen counter. A small pair of children's shoes rested beside the front door. Life had entered the space. Cade stood quietly near the kitchen island, watching. Leela sat wrapped in a blanket, slowly sipping warm milk. Her tiny hands clung to the mug like it was the most precious object in the world. Ivy sat beside her, still cautious, still observing everything. But the panic had softened, a little. Cade slid a small lamp into the hallway near the guest room. Lila noticed immediately. You left it on, she whispered. Yes, Cade replied. For you, the girl nodded slowly. Even small light mattered. Emily No Ivy watched the exchange carefully. Trust was not given easily, but it could begin in inches. Just then, Cade's phone vibrated quietly against the counter. One message. Unknown number. No caller ID. Cade opened it. The text was short. Cold. Tell Serena to sign, or I take what's mine. Cade stared at the screen. He didn't need a signature to know who sent it. Across the room, Ivy was watching him again. Children learn to read faces faster than adults realized. Is he mad? She asked quietly. Cade locked the phone screen. Not mad, he said calmly. Impatient. The words seemed to settle heavily in the room. Lila leaned her head gently against Cade's arm. A small gesture, but meaningful. Ivy noticed. Trust was moving. Slowly. Outside the window, snow drifted across the city streets. Somewhere beyond those buildings, Damian Cross was already planning his next move. And this time, he was getting closer. Detective Nia Vale arrived just after noon. The moment she stepped into Cade's penthouse, Ivy relaxed slightly. Not fully, but enough. Nia had a presence that made rooms steadier. She placed a thin folder on the kitchen counter. We may have a problem, she said. Cade folded his arms. Damian Nia nodded. I pulled traffic camera data from the intersection where Serena's crash happened. She opened the folder and slid several printed images across the counter. Still frames from city traffic cameras. Snow falling. Streetlights glowing. 2 vehicles entering an intersection. Serena's car. And another vehicle. A black SUV. Cade leaned closer. That's his, he said. Nia nodded again. The timing is interesting. She tapped the final image. The SUV accelerated, Hard, seconds before the collision. Cade's expression darkened. "You're saying this wasn't random?" "I'm saying," Nia replied carefully. Damien's phone pinged 2 blocks away 5 minutes before the crash. The implications filled the room like heavy smoke. Leela played quietly with a blanket nearby, unaware. Ivy, however, was listening. Children always listened. "Did he do it?" she asked softly. Nia hesitated. "We don't have proof yet." But Cade already understood the strategy. Serena injured, insurance claim pending, Damien offering to handle paperwork, pressure, control, money. He didn't just want her to sign, Cade murmured. He needed her desperate. Nia closed the folder slowly. "That's what it looks like." Ivy hugged her knees tightly. "Mom said he kept talking about the money," she whispered. Cade felt something cold and focused settle in his chest. Damien Cross thought fear was leverage. But now the equation had changed. Because the man Damien planned to pressure was a billionaire who understood leverage better than anyone. And Cade Ellington had just decided something. This was no longer a rescue. It was a fight. Snow had stopped falling over Chicago, but the sky still hung low and gray above the city. Inside Cade Ellington's penthouse, the quiet felt heavier than before. Detective Nia Vale stood at the kitchen island with the folder open, the traffic camera stills spread across the polished marble surface. Cade studied the images again. Serena Wren's sedan entering the intersection. A dark SUV accelerating seconds before the crash. The timing was too exact to ignore. "It looks intentional," Cade said quietly. Nia folded her arms. "I'm careful with words like that until the evidence says it for me." "But you're thinking it." She didn't deny it. "Let's say the pattern raises questions." Cade leaned back against the counter, his mind already running through scenarios. Damien Cross had spent weeks pressuring Serena to sign insurance documents. If Serena had been seriously injured in the crash, she would have been isolated, vulnerable, dependent, and desperate. Desperate people signed things they would normally read. Nia slid another document across the counter. Financial records, loan statements, overdue balances. Damien Cross wasn't just manipulative. He was drowning. 3 private lenders, Nia explained. 2 default notices. 1 personal loan tied to property development that collapsed 6 months ago. Cade studied the numbers. Millions. Debt that large had gravity. He needed fast money, Cade murmured. "Insurance payout would do that," Nia replied. Across the living room, Lila quietly played with the edge of a blanket, unaware of the adult storm building around her. Ivy wasn't playing. She sat cross-legged on the floor, listening carefully. Children who grew up around danger learned quickly that silence did not mean safety. "Mom said he kept asking about the claim," Ivy said softly. Both adults looked toward her. "He said if she signed early, the money would come faster." Cade nodded slowly. He positioned himself as the person who could help her navigate the paperwork, he said. Nia added quietly, "Which means he would control where the money went." Control. That word hung in the air. Cade understood control better than most men. In boardrooms, control meant leverage. In this case, it meant fear. "He isolates Serena," Cade said. "Pressures her about money, makes the process sound complicated." Nia continued the thought. "Then she's injured in a crash. Now she's exhausted, medicated, scared about her daughters, and someone offers to handle the documents." Cade exhaled slowly. A perfect trap. Across the room, Ivy's voice broke the silence. He said, "Mom doesn't understand business." Cade's jaw tightened. That sentence had been used against Serena as a weapon. "You're telling me," Cade said quietly, "that Damien Cross may have engineered the situation from the beginning." Nia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gathered the documents and closed the folder. "I'm telling you," she said, "that desperation makes people do very ugly things." Outside the window, the city looked calm. But somewhere inside that calm, Damien Cross was already calculating his next move. Because if the girls were no longer in his reach, his leverage was disappearing, and men who relied on leverage rarely surrendered quietly. Night returned quickly. Chicago winters had short evenings and darkness settled over the city long before the streets quieted. Inside Cade Ellington's penthouse, the lights glowed warm against the glass walls. For the first time in days, Lila slept deeply, her small body curled beneath the blanket on the couch. Ivy sat beside her, still awake, still alert. Cade noticed something about the way Ivy watched the room. She didn't simply look around. She listened. Every sound mattered. The elevator hum in the hallway, footsteps outside the apartment door, the faint movement of air through the ventilation system. Fear had trained her senses. Cade poured a cup of tea in the kitchen when Ivy suddenly froze. Her head tilted slightly, listening. Then she whispered, "He's here." Cade turned slowly. "What did you say?" Ivy stood up. "He's here," she repeated, voice trembling now. Detective Vale looked up from the couch. "Ivy, what makes you think that—" The girl didn't answer. She moved toward the window overlooking the street below. Cade followed. Outside, snow had begun falling again in thin, drifting lines. Traffic moved slowly through the evening streets. Everything looked normal, but Ivy kept staring. "He waits," she said quietly. "What he waits before he comes inside." Cade's phone vibrated suddenly in his pocket. Security notification. He opened the building camera feed. A man stood near the side entrance of the tower. Tall, dark coat, calm posture. Damien Cross. He wasn't forcing the door. He was speaking politely to the night security guard. Cade muted the audio and zoomed the camera. Damien smiled. Confident, controlled, like a man who believed the outcome of this story already belonged to him. He's telling them he's family. Nia said quietly. Cade's expression hardened. That's exactly what he would say. Down below, Damien stepped slightly closer to the entrance. The guard hesitated, uncertain. Nia grabbed her phone. "Dispatch, I need patrol units at the Ellington Tower." Ivy suddenly grabbed Cade's sleeve. "Don't let him come up," she whispered. The fear in her voice carried the weight of everything she had endured. Cade placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "He's not coming through that door," he said calmly. Outside, Damien seemed to realize something had changed. He stepped back from the entrance. Police lights appeared at the end of the street, flashing blue across the falling snow. Damien looked up, directly toward the penthouse windows. Even from that distance, Cade could feel it. The look wasn't angry, it was calculating. Damien Cross wasn't finished. He was adjusting the plan. The police cruiser stopped at the curb outside Cade Ellington's building. Two officers stepped out, their breath visible in the cold winter air. Damien Cross remained standing beside the sidewalk, calm as ever. No attempt to run. No visible frustration. Just patience. Inside the penthouse, Cade watched through the glass wall overlooking the street. Ivy stood beside him, her small hand gripping his sleeve tightly. Detective Vale listened to the radio call through her phone. "Officers are making contact," she said quietly. Down below, the officers approached Damien. One of them spoke. Damien responded calmly. Too calmly. The kind of calm that made people doubt their own suspicions. He gestured politely toward the building entrance. Explaining, clarifying, deflecting. Cade recognized the tactic instantly. This was the language of manipulation. Meanwhile, Ivy's eyes remained fixed on the street. "He's lying," she whispered. Cade didn't answer, because Ivy was right. Several minutes passed. The officers finished their conversation. Damien nodded politely and stepped back from the entrance. For a moment, it looked like the situation was over. Then something unexpected happened. Damien turned and looked straight up. toward the penthouse window. Even from several floors above, Cade felt the weight of that gaze. Damien wasn't guessing where they were. He knew. The two men stared at each other across the distance. Then Damien spoke. The words were quiet, but clear enough to carry through the still winter air. "She'll sign." The officers glanced at him. Damien continued calmly. "They always do." Inside the apartment, Ivy trembled. Cade felt her grip tighten on his sleeve. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They carried a certainty built on years of intimidation. Damien believed fear always won eventually. He believed people broke. He believed mothers signed anything to protect their children. But something had changed. Because now Serena Wren was no longer standing alone. The police guided Damien toward the cruiser. Not under arrest, just removal from private property. Temporary, but meaningful. Before stepping into the car, Damien glanced once more toward the tower. The look in his eyes promised something simple. This wasn't over. The cruiser drove away. Snow began covering the tire tracks almost immediately. Inside the penthouse, the silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence now. Ivy finally released Cade's sleeve. "Is he gone?" she asked quietly. Cade knelt beside her. "For tonight," he said. Detective Vale looked toward the window. Her voice was calm. "But men like Damien Cross don't walk away from leverage." Cade nodded slowly. He understood that better than anyone, because in business, and in war, the moment someone loses leverage, that's when they become the most dangerous, and the real battle was about to begin. Morning arrived gray and sharp over downtown Chicago. Inside Cade Ellington's penthouse, the air carried a strange mixture of calm and tension, the quiet before something decisive. Detective Nia Vale spread several documents across the long marble table in Cade's dining room. Legal reports, traffic camera stills, phone location data, security footage from the tower. Each piece alone meant little. Together they began forming a pattern. Serena Wren sat at the table, her injured arm resting carefully in a sling. The bruises along her collarbone had darkened overnight, but the fear in her eyes had changed. It wasn't the same fear anymore. Fear had been replaced with something steadier. Resolve. "I want to understand exactly what happens next," Serena said quietly. Across from her sat a legal advocate Nia had contacted through the district attorney's office, someone experienced in coercion and financial exploitation cases. "We begin by documenting the pressure Damien applied," the advocate explained. "Every message, every visit, every witness." Serena nodded slowly. "He came by almost every day after the accident," she said. "At first he sounded helpful. He said insurance companies are slow, complicated, that he knew how to speed things up." Cade listened carefully. "He was positioning himself as your solution," he said. Serena nodded again, but then the tone changed. How, the advocate asked. Serena looked down briefly before answering. "He started saying things like, 'If the claim took too long, my daughters might suffer.'" The room fell silent. Threats didn't always sound like threats. Sometimes they sounded like advice. Nia placed a printed copy of the text message on the table. "Tell Serena to sign, or I take what's mine." Serena stared at it. "I never saw that," she whispered. "He didn't send it to you," Cade said. "He sent it to me." The legal advocate leaned forward. "That message alone supports intimidation." Nia added another piece. "And we have building security footage of him attempting to gain access last night." Serena looked toward Cade. "You didn't have to get involved in this," she said quietly. Cade met her eyes. "Actually," he replied calmly, "I did." Across the room, Ivy sat beside Lila, quietly drawing shapes on a piece of paper. But she was listening. Children always listened. "What if he lies in court?" Ivy asked suddenly. All the adults looked toward her. Cade answered gently. Then we show the truth, the legal advocate nodded. Evidence speaks louder than lies. Outside the window, the city traffic moved slowly beneath the winter sky. Inside the penthouse, a battle that had once been private was about to enter public light, and once it did, Damian Cross would no longer control the story. The courtroom downtown was colder than Cade expected. Not physically, emotionally. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as people filled the benches, lawyers, clerks, observers, reporters who sensed a story forming. Cade Ellington sat beside Serena Wren. Across the aisle sat Damian Cross, impeccably dressed, composed, almost relaxed. He looked like a man attending a business meeting rather than a legal hearing. Detective Nia Vale stood near the prosecution table, quietly reviewing documents with the district attorney. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The proceedings began. Damian's attorney spoke first. Smooth. Confident. He described the situation as a misunderstanding within a complicated family dynamic. Mr. Cross simply offered assistance to Miss Wren during a difficult financial period, the attorney explained. Unfortunately, certain individuals have misinterpreted that help. His gaze flicked briefly toward Cade. A subtle accusation. The implication was clear. A wealthy outsider interfering in family matters. Serena felt the pressure instantly. Her hands trembled slightly as she was called to the witness stand. Ms. Wren, the attorney, began politely. "Is it true Mr. Cross offered to help manage your insurance paperwork?" "Yes," Serena answered. "And you declined that help." "I did." Why Serena hesitated. The courtroom felt very quiet. Then she lifted her head. Because he wasn't helping. The attorney smiled thinly. "What do you mean?" Serena inhaled slowly. "He kept telling me my daughters might suffer if I didn't sign." A murmur moved across the room. The attorney objected immediately. Speculation. The judge allowed Serena to continue. "Did Mr. Cross threaten you directly?" the attorney pressed. Serena shook her head. "No." The attorney relaxed slightly. Then Serena added quietly, "He didn't have to." Silence filled the courtroom. Sometimes intimidation didn't require shouting. Sometimes it required presence. The prosecution introduced the message Damian had sent Cade. "Tell Serena to sign, or I take what's mine." The courtroom grew even quieter. Damian's expression remained controlled. But Cade noticed something subtle. For the first time since the hearing began, Damian stopped smiling. The courtroom tension had grown thick enough to feel. Damian Cross remained seated calmly beside his attorney, his expression returning to its familiar mask of quiet confidence. But the prosecution wasn't finished. The district attorney stood. "Your Honor, we would like to call one final witness." A small figure stood near the courtroom doors. Ivy Wren. Cade felt Serena tense beside him. "Ivy doesn't have to do this," Serena whispered. But Ivy had already stepped forward. Slow, careful, brave. The courtroom watched in silence as the 8-year-old girl approached the witness stand. She looked very small beneath the high-ceiling lights. The bailiff adjusted the microphone for her height. "Do you understand the difference between telling the truth and telling a lie?" the judge asked gently. Ivy nodded. "Yes." "Do you promise to tell the truth today?" "Yes." The district attorney spoke softly. "Ivy, can you tell the court why you and your sister were in the parking garage that night?" Ivy's voice was quiet, but steady. "Because we ran away." Why she looked down briefly at her hands, then back up. "Because Damian said if Mom didn't sign the papers, he would take Lila." A ripple of shock moved through the courtroom. Damian's attorney stood immediately. Objection, but the judge raised a hand. Overruled, the attorney tried again. "Ivy, are you sure you understood what Mr. Cross meant?" Ivy didn't hesitate. "Yes." How the girl swallowed. "Because he said if Mom didn't listen, people might decide Lila was safer somewhere else." The words hung heavily in the air. The district attorney stepped closer. Is that why you told Mr. Ellington he could take your sister instead of you? Ivy nodded. I thought if someone else took her. Damien couldn't. The courtroom had become completely silent. Even Damien Cross no longer looked comfortable. The prosecution introduced the traffic camera images, the threatening text message, the building security footage. Piece by piece, the pattern became undeniable. Finally, Damien spoke, quietly, but with irritation breaking through. This is ridiculous, he muttered. The judge looked down at him sharply, and in that moment, the man who believed fear controlled everything began losing control himself. The courtroom remained silent after Ivy Wren's final words. For a long moment, no one moved. No papers shuffled. No chairs creaked. Even the fluorescent lights above seemed to hum more softly, as if the entire room understood that something irreversible had just happened. Cade Ellington sat perfectly still beside Serena Wren, but inside him everything had changed. He had watched billion-dollar negotiations collapse from a single sentence before. He knew what it looked like when power shifted. It never happened loudly at first. It happened in tiny fractures, in one expression, one hesitation, one truth said aloud at the exact right moment. And Damien Cross had just cracked. His attorney rose again, trying to regain control. Your Honor, the witness is a child under emotional distress. Her interpretation, she did not offer interpretation, the judge said coldly. She offered testimony. The interruption cut through the room like a blade. The district attorney stepped forward and began assembling the final chain of evidence. The threatening burner phone message sent to Cade, the hospital access attempt, the security footage from the tower entrance, Damien's growing financial desperation, the repeated pressure on Serena, the traffic camera stills showing the black SUV accelerating into the intersection seconds before the crash. Not one dramatic miracle, something stronger, a pattern. The district attorney's voice remained calm, deliberate. This case is not built on one outburst or one misunderstanding. It is built on sustained coercion, strategic intimidation, attempted control of vulnerable dependents, and escalating acts intended to force compliance. Damien's jaw tightened. For the first time, his carefully polished calm looked thin. His attorney objected again, but the words felt weaker now, less convincing, less clean. The judge reviewed the file for several long seconds, then looked up. The court finds sufficient cause to uphold immediate protective measures for Ms. Serena Wren and her minor daughters, she said. The court also recognizes compelling evidence supporting charges related to intimidation, stalking, attempted unlawful access, coercive control, and further investigation into the circumstances surrounding the collision. A breath seemed to leave the entire room at once. Serena closed her eyes, not in defeat, in relief. Damien stood abruptly. This is absurd, he snapped, the polished tone finally breaking. She owed me. The room froze. His attorney turned sharply toward him too late. There it was. Not a confession in full, but enough. The judge's face hardened. Mr. Cross, sit down. He did not. Two officers moved immediately. Damien looked across the courtroom, first at Serena, then at Cade. His expression was no longer smooth or superior. It was stripped bare now, anger, humiliation, disbelief. He had built his strategy on fear. He had relied on pressure, exhaustion, and isolation. He had assumed Serena would fold. He had assumed the girls would stay hidden and frightened. He had assumed Cade Ellington would lose interest once the inconvenience became public. He had been wrong. As the officers took hold of his arms, Damien did not fight wildly. He twisted once sharply, then stopped. The leash of control he had used on everyone else was now around him. Cade did not look away. Not because he wanted dominance, because he wanted certainty. He wanted to see with his own eyes that the man who had turned fear into a weapon no longer held it. Damien was guided out of the courtroom in stunned silence. No dramatic music, no cheers. Just the sound of dress shoes on the hard floor and the low metallic click of cuffs. And with that, leverage died. The courthouse doors opened to a pale winter afternoon. Light spilled across the stone steps outside, clean and cold, reflecting off old snow gathered along the curbs. The city moved around them in its usual rhythm, traffic, distant sirens, people hurrying through the wind, but for Serena Wren, the world seemed to stop the moment she stepped outside. At the bottom of the steps, Ivy and Lila were waiting. Cade stood slightly behind them, not in front, not between, close enough to protect, far enough to let the moment belong to them. Serena saw her daughters, and all remaining strength left her body at once. Ivy moved first, not slowly, not carefully. She ran. Her small boots struck the courthouse steps in fast, uneven beats, and then she was there, throwing herself into Serena's arms. Serena dropped to her knees despite the healing pain in her shoulder and wrapped both arms around her daughter like she was trying to make up for every minute they had been apart. Lila reached them a second later, tears already falling, and Serena pulled her close too. For a moment, the three of them simply held each other there on the courthouse steps. The winter wind moving around them, the city blurring into irrelevance. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer fear. It was reunion. Then Ivy broke. Not gently. Not a quiet little cry. The kind of sob that had been waiting too long. She clung to Serena and cried into her coat, her thin body shaking with everything she had held in for days. "I'm sorry," Ivy choked out. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect everybody. I tried. I really tried." Serena pulled back just enough to cradle Ivy's face in both hands. Her own tears were falling now. "Oh, baby," she whispered, voice breaking. "You already did." Ivy stared at her, stunned. "You kept your sister alive," Serena said. "You got her out. You got her to safety. You were brave when no child should have had to be." Lila pressed her face into Serena's side and Serena kissed the top of her head. "You both survived," she whispered. "That matters." A few steps away, Detective Nia Vale stood with her coat buttoned against the wind, watching quietly. She caught Cade's eye and gave the smallest nod. Not triumph, not celebration, just recognition. They had made it through the worst part. For now. Ivy slowly turned her head toward Cade. There was no fear in her expression this time. Only exhaustion, gratitude, and something even more fragile than trust. Belonging. Lila left Serena's arms for a moment and crossed the few steps between herself and Cade. She slipped her small hand into his. It was such a small gesture. But Cade felt it all the way to his chest. "You saved us," she whispered. The words hit harder than any courtroom victory. Cade knelt down to her level. "No," he said softly. "You all saved each other." Ivy looked at him, then really looked at him. This time she did not seem like a frightened child making calculations for survival. She looked like a little girl who had finally been told she could stop carrying the whole world on her back. Behind them, reporters lingered near the sidewalk, sensing the story, hoping for statements. But none came. This wasn't for headlines. This wasn't for spectacle. This was for three people learning all at once what safety felt like. And one man realizing that the emptiest part of his life had just been filled by something no amount of money had ever bought him. Warmth. Weeks later, winter had softened along the edge of Lake Michigan. The city was still there, its steel, its noise, its cold ambition. But Cade Ellington no longer returned each night to the same glass penthouse filled with elegant silence. Too much had changed. Or maybe for the first time in years, something had finally become clear. He had stepped back from parts of his empire, delegated more, canceled less important appearances, ignored the kind of social invitations that once filled the calendar of a man who had everything except anyone to come home to. Now at the edge of the lake, he stood on the porch of a smaller house with warmer windows and quieter walls. The place was not extravagant. It was alive. Inside, dinner dishes sat drying beside the sink. A child's coloring book lay open on the coffee table. A soft yellow lamp glowed near the hallway instead of the cold architectural lighting he used to prefer. The house had learned voices quickly. Serena was healing, not all at once, not perfectly, but truly. Some nights she still woke from uneasy dreams. Some mornings she went quiet when paperwork arrived, or an unknown number lit up her phone. But those moments passed faster now. The fear no longer ruled the whole day. Lila slept through the night. That more than anything felt like a miracle. No more trembling awake at every sound. No more coughing from cold air in dark places. No more clutching blankets like armor. She had begun laughing again in those sudden full bursts that belonged only to children who finally believed tomorrow would come gently. And Ivy? Ivy had changed in ways that were quieter, but just as profound. She no longer slept closest to the exits. She no longer checked every lock twice before bed. She no longer listened for engines with the rigid stillness of someone bracing for danger. Some habits lingered. Healing was not magic. But the weight she carried had become lighter. That evening, Cade stood in the doorway of the hallway and saw Ivy pause outside Lila's bedroom. The younger girl was asleep beneath a pale blanket, one hand curled under her cheek, breathing slowly, peacefully. Ivy looked at her for a long moment. Then she whispered almost to herself, "She's not scared anymore." Cade stepped beside her. The house was quiet in the best possible way. "Neither are you," he said gently. Ivy looked up at him. The old watchfulness was still there in traces, but now it lived beside something new, trust strong enough to ask difficult questions. Outside, the last color of sunset faded over the lake. Somewhere in the kitchen, Serena was humming softly while putting away cups. Ivy turned toward Cade fully. "If someone comes again," she asked, voice small but steady, "will you still choose us?" The question hung in the warm hallway light. It held the entire story inside it. The garage, the snow, the fear, the bargain, the courtroom, the long road from survival to safety. Cade did not answer quickly because the moment deserved more than instinct. It deserved truth. He crouched so they were eye level. "Every single time," he said. Ivy's face trembled not with fear now, but with relief so deep it almost looked like pain leaving the body. Then she stepped forward and hugged him. Not carefully, not as a test. Completely. Cade closed his arms around her and looked past her shoulder toward the front porch, where the light had just clicked on automatically against the deepening dusk. It glowed warm over the steps and into the night. Not like a warning, like a promise. And for the first time in a very long time, Cade Ellington understood what home really was. Not silence, not control, not perfection, just the steady sound of people you would choose every single time. Did this story leave a lasting impression on you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tap the end screen to see another heartwarming story waiting for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, then tap the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Until our next story.